You can hear us, right?
Yeah, we can start, Will.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds promising. Okay, please welcome again on stage our guest of honor, Mick Garris. Let's make it fun.
And most of you stuck around. Thank you.
A sequel is an art form in itself. There's sort of an expectation from the previous one, but then again there's always room to maneuver and there's an expectation of something new. How did you approach this one? This was your first feature as a director.
Well, first of all, there is no such place as Grover's Bend. We built that. So there are a lot of jokes in the end titles. But yeah, a sequel, I've been responsible for a lot of movies with numbers in the title. And this was the first one that I directed. And the good thing is there were low expectations because the first Critters was a very low budget movie and a very modest success. It did pretty well, but only because it cost so little. It cost $2 million. So they decided to go bigger and better. This was all of $4 million and a total flop. I went opening day to my neighborhood theater. There were 2 people in the audience and I thought, okay. But you want to give people what they hope for and expect, but more than that. You want to surprise them. You know, today franchises go on for 10, 12, 13 installments. And to me, there's nothing interesting about that because it's just repeating the same thing over. This went a little goofier, a little much bigger, but we amplified things. The critter ball was something that was new to it all. The number of critters was bigger. And we decided to really embrace one of my favorite themes. Do you know the painter Norman Rockwell? Yes. Great painter of Americana, an idealized America, a naive and sweet and beautiful America. So I like to take Norman Rockwell's America and send it to hell. And so that's what we did in this, and just allowed ourselves to exceed expectations. And just, if it was really a stupid idea, we'd embrace it rather than ignore it. And so it went a little more in the comedic vein, and so it took 35 years for it to develop the audience that it has now. It played last month in Norway at a festival that I was at. It plays in theaters on Easter in the States often, and this is 35 years later, and it's way better received than it was when it was new.
Prior to this, you had been working as a script editor and screenwriter for amazing stories. This is produced by New Line Cinema and by Bob Shay, who picked you. And you say in your biography that you were under the impression that one of the reasons that he picked you, that he saw you as a junior Spielberg in some kind. Can you tell us about that? How did Bob Shay explain it to you?
Well, not so much that he saw me as a junior Spielberg, but because I was working for Steven Spielberg on Amazing Stories, and I had worked within that realm. The first Critters was very much a Spielberg-influenced movie. So I think Bob thought he could get 2 for 1. I was a writer and a director. I worked closely with Steven Spielberg, and maybe some of that Spielberg magic would rub off on his movie, his $4 million movie, as opposed to, like, Gremlins was a $15-16 million movie. Gremlins 2 was a $60 million movie. And our little underachiever was a $4 million movie. But he never explicitly said that, but I'm sure the intent was they got somebody from the Spielberg camp in the hopes that it would add a little of the glitter of a Spielberg movie to a New Line picture.
Talking about the script, you are a screenwriter. This wasn't your script. How much did you affect the script during the process?
I think I added a lot of the sweetness to the characters. The original writer, David Toohey, is a terrific writer and director himself. He wrote his draft and said, I don't want to change anymore. And Bob Shay said, well, it still needs some work. and they encouraged me to come in and do it. Like I said, I embraced the goofy part, because it's the only comedy I've ever directed. Everything I've done, there are moments of humor and elements of humor, but very grounded. This decided to just go for it. Having a critter bite a tire and inflate and get squashed as it's rolled over. Things like that, the silliness. But all in the context of having the characters play it, you know, in a genuine way. There's a real relationship between the characters. And the first movie had a lot of those elements too. But we just decided to embrace the audacity of it and treated it like it was Shakespeare. That may sound silly after what you just saw. But then, what is it? So it was just an opportunity to try and do more, rather than do the same, or more of the same. Try and amplify what was fun about the first one and add some things that were unexpected.
Visual puns play a big role in the amplifying. How much of that was in the script? How much did you storyboard yourself, like details like the boiling critter in the deep fryer and etc., etc.?
I don't like to storyboard in general, but when there are special effects scenes or stunt scenes or anything where everybody needs to see exactly what the shots are of the day, and you put them on a board and you have each of the illustrations that show what the angle is, what the size is, all of that. In the things that really had to be specific, because the special effects crew had to know, the stunt crew had to know, the puppet crew had to know, shot by shot by shot by shot. So those sequences were storyboarded, but everything was scripted. There was no improvisation in this movie. I like to encourage improvisation, but there were so many moving parts and so little time. So many parts, so little time. But it was all very planned out ahead of time, and especially because it was my first time as a director on a feature film, I didn't want to fuck it up. So it was really important to be prepared, because if not, something like this with so many moving parts could easily have been the giant critter ball that rolled over me and ate me alive.
Questions from the audience? Please.
Okay, I saw this movie a ton as a kid. And seeing this as Critters 2, I now realize I have no idea what Critters 1 is, because that's always First question, is the term nothing face, did that come from Critters?
No.
No, okay.
The question was, did the term nothing face come from the first Critters? And no, it didn't. There was no transforming, I believe. Well, yeah, there was, because I've only seen it once, the original Critters. And just to make sure I was not spoiling anything. But I don't think they did any on-camera transformations. And, you know, the cheesehead look was something that was embraced in the second one, just because of the transformational issues that we had and the jokes that we had and the almost Freddy Krueger and turning into the Playboy centerfold, and that was something that was not a part of the first one that we embraced and made an important element in that.
So, but the term itself...
Cheesehead came from this one, yeah.
Right,
And it was David Toohey who came up with that. I'd love to take credit.
Well, there was an album called Nothing Face by Voivod the year after this came out, so it's the term Nothing Face.
Oh, I wonder if that came from here.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, a good question, yeah. Who else? Right here.
Did you ever have a temptation to change the design of the creatures? Because I think that even though they are iconic, they are just balls with mouths and really...
They're puppets. They're very
puppets,
obvious
exactly.
puppets.
Yeah.
They are more advanced than the puppets in the first Critters, but only to a certain degree. And there's only so much you could do. This was before there was ever CGI, and when they did the little Critters series of 15-minute movies that they did a couple of years ago, they were CGI enhanced and all that. We had to make do with what we were working with. The Kyoto brothers did a great job of creating the puppets and all. But again, you either try and hide it or you embrace it. These are fake-looking puppets that are obviously on somebody's hand. So let's just embrace it and do the best job that we can. So if you've got a $200 million movie, there's still stuff you wish you could afford to do at that price. If you got a $4 million movie, you wish you could do everything better than you're capable of doing. So there wasn't really the thought of totally redesigning it, because they hadn't become iconic yet, because Critters 1 was just a modest success. It wasn't a hit, and it wasn't part of the popular culture like Gremlins were. So it wasn't because we didn't want to alter their look, but we thought they're cute. Cute and nasty at the same time. So this is a very family-friendly, mean-spirited little movie.
And may I ask, what is the underlying message of Critters 2?
Find the body that you need to embrace. By the way, the cinematography, I can't let this go unremarked upon, was by Russell Carpenter, who later won an Oscar for Titanic. Yeah.
Became James Cameron regular.
Yeah, he's James Cameron's regular guy.
Yeah.
So, but we got him for our little extravaganza. Yeah.
You said that you worked earlier as a script writer or a script editor or something similar to that, and you have here like a pretty, how would I say, there's like a pretty typical dramatic structure going. You got the breeding pair, you got the sort of Errol Flynn character who will be protecting
It's a Western,
them.
basically.
Yeah, and so on. So do you remember anything about writing it? Like, did you have any points where you decided, like, for example, it's pretty clear that 10 years later, the ending of Independence Day was taken from this film, and so on.
Well, I'd like to think that's true. But I doubt that if they ever saw this.
Do you remember anything about...
As far as the structural thing, the hardest, heaviest lifting was done by David Toohey, who did the original draft. I came in and made alterations and amped up the last act and gave a little flesh and bone to the characters and exaggerated the sense of humor. But I'm not someone who studies script writing's rules so much. Or I feel like screenwriting books are good for the technical way of laying out a script, but I think they are the enemy of creative filmmaking. I think the rules are made to be broken. You know, the original screenwriters of the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, they never read a screenwriting book. They never went to a screenwriting class, and they created the form. So I think it's our job to keep, now this is obviously not a remotely original screenplay, but it has really original creative moments to it. And that's the least you can do. The most you can do is do something that's completely starkly original. There's a movie called Dream Scenario that is just coming out with Nicolas Cage that I highly recommend, and I think it's coming out next week, maybe even here in Finland. But
We have it here in the festival.
oh, and it's in the festival.
Yeah.
See it, because that's what I'm talking about. It breaks all the rules, and it's wonderful. And Nicolas Cage is great in it. But yeah, I think structure can be your enemy, because most of the people who go to screenwriting classes are the executives at the studios who think, okay, these writers didn't follow these rules, this must suck. And that's why all the movies that come out of the studios are the same movie over and over.
More questions?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
you have your turn.
So
Yeah.
one of the
In the middle, please.
one of the characters in the movie makes a jokey comment about Cujo, and I was wondering what was your relationship to Stephen King at the time of Critters 2?
It did not exist yet.
Okay.
I had never even met Stephen King when that happened, so it was nicely prescient to have a Stephen King joke before I'd even met the guy, and then
Was that something that you put in the script? Or
yes.
Interesting.
So I was a Stephen King fan before I was a Stephen King director. So you had one.
Yes. So first of all, this film is so much fun. It never misses a beat.
Thank
And
you.
when it comes to horror sequels, I think it's in the highest of tiers.
Ah, shucks.
So my question is, this was your first feature film, and seeing it's a really practical effects heavy film, and you know, we've all heard stories about Jaws and how things can go wrong. Were there any particular effects sequences that you found challenging to shoot through this, and do you have any stories you'd like to share?
Did
about
everybody
that?
hear that? Okay. We do have a second unit director, and he had come out of the Roger Corman School. He directed Forbidden World, and which was also effects heavy. So the most complicated scene that was done by the second unit director, and I was running back and forth, and that's the storyboards I was talking about. You'd have a big board posting them. He would do the shots, come over, check them off. I would come over and see that they'd been done. So he did Alan, God,
Halsman.
Holtzman, thank you very much. So he did a lot of the heavy lifting, but for me, the hardest part was actually the chase with the critter ball in the truck, which was all done first unit. I'd never done a chase before, and you know, two cars chasing one another is a difficult enough thing to do, but a truck and a critter ball was particularly challenging. And there are two giant critter balls. One of them has all the faces that were remotely controlled and articulated, and one of them was just a balloon covered with critter pelts, so it could easily bounce over things and roll and the like. The other one, the articulated one, was really heavy and had to be on a metal bar connected to the truck or run in different ways, but you couldn't roll it on its face or you'd smash all of these really beautifully sculpted critters. So that was by far the most difficult thing for me to do. Is somebody dinging?
No,
Or is, oh, this is ringing.
yeah, there's a slight echo that I'm so gonna get rid of before we come on stage. It's off actually. I don't know what's the reason for it, but I'll figure it out. Sorry about it.
I think we're feeding back because the speakers are
Yeah, it
behind
might
us.
be. It might be.
Anyway.
Thank
Any- Yes, thank you. You had another question, yeah.
Yeah, a question about the tone of the movie and who it was intended to be for. Because like my 13-year-old self thanks you for the gratuitous bits. And you know, there was a couple of like really gruesome effects, but then most of the movie is almost like a family creature movie. So I'm just wondering who you thought the main audience was going to be with all those different elements.
The main audience was 13-year-old you. And 13-year-old me. We were surprised that we got a PG-13 rating, which is 13 and under, it's fine. Our rating is 17 and under. Because of the nudity, but because the nudity was handled in a non-sexual manner, that helped us a lot. But if you have a monster movie, it's got to be a little vicious. You know, some of that violence has to be potent or it's not going to matter. And I think all of us in this room wouldn't be here if there wasn't a little of the stunted growth for our cultural personalities. But it's meant to be fun, and we know they're not real. We know they're rubber puppets, and if they rip people to shreds or chew all of the meat off their bones as they roll over them in a giant ball, it's just a lot of fun, and people who get it, and people who don't, it wasn't made for them. It wasn't made for your parents or mine, or yours. Anybody else? Yeah, Heather.
Why do you think this film now has a cult following? I remember many years ago when I was interviewing someone at Tribeca Film Festival who's a young horror filmmaker, and I would ask him the questions like, what film did you watch to get you into horror? And he said Critters 2. I'll remember this to this day because of the Easter Bunny. But so you inspired.
I think because there's a real love for it. It's obvious that this was made by a people who love the genre and who love this kind of thing, but also there's a genuine sweetness about it. The characters, B movies don't always have great film relationships at the heart of it. And I'm not saying that this is a love story or anything, of that nature. But I think there's a commitment to the characters and the characters to the story that maybe resonates in a way now that nobody got the opportunity to because they didn't go see it when it came out originally. But I think it's a sense of commitment and taking it seriously and not thinking of it as a gutter genre. Respecting the material with a great cast that's committed to it and not going, oh, it's just a horror movie, I don't need to work hard. You know, you need to work harder. So.
I might add a couple of more. I mentioned Bob Shay earlier. New Line and Bob Shay are quite influential in horror in general, and especially in the 80s. What was your feeling of Bob?
Bob was great. He was nothing but a source of support, and of course Win Shay, who plays Sal, is his sister. But he was always supportive. He told me a story. He's been on my podcast, which is ending at the end of next month, by the way, after 7 years. So thank you for not moaning. You've got over 200 shows to listen to over 7 years. But he was on the show and he told me a story he'd never told me before. And this was just like 3 years ago. That he had a meeting with a money source that was going to put a huge amount of money into New Line. And it was opening day for Critters 2. He took him to dinner at Musso and Frank's, which is a very expensive, classic Hollywood eatery on Hollywood Boulevard. And afterwards, they went down the street to see opening night of Critters 2. There was no one in the theater, and he did not get the money. But he still let me make the movie. And he gave me my first feature, and it was a gamble for him, and it didn't pay off in that movie. But, you know, they made 2 more Critters movies. We did more work. He and I both got more and more successful over time. Particularly him, you know, as the owner of New Line Cinema. He sold it to Warner Brothers for hundreds of millions of dollars and still maintains an important role at that company. Basically, he was made by, well, Freddie made him, but on top of that, he was the guy who decided to do the Lord of the Rings movies and do it as a trilogy and commit hundreds of millions of dollars to it and made billions off of it. So Bob's doing just fine. But he was always terrific to me, and I owe him a great debt, and I really like the man. And I'd tell you if I did.
Okay. I don't see any hands raising, so I'll wrap this up by asking and saying that you referred to this film as a failure when it came out, but in terms of the whole franchise, it wasn't a failure. This thing continued.
Well, it's interesting because Critters 3 and 4 were made direct to home video, and they were made back to back, and at a much lower budget. So it was a failure then. But over the years, it made its money back in video very quickly. But over the years, it keeps playing festivals, and you know, as good as Critters, the first Critters is, it doesn't get revived. And maybe it's because of Easter, and maybe it's because of the cast or whatever. But this has had a life that nobody anticipated, and here we all are. And I'm humbled by it. And gratified by it. You know, it's something that I put my heart and soul into 35 years ago, and people are laughing and applauding it now. So I can't be more grateful to everyone here for that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back for more of this during the festival, and next time without the extra sounds. Sorry for that.